we're gonna look at how to use masks in After Effects, but before that we're gonna see how we use them in Photoshop and compare that with the After Effects workflow. So I'm gonna open an image, any image, any two images, so let's say these two, and I need to put one on top of the other so that it comes here as a layer, right? So now that I have my layer, let's scale it up, Control T, Shift, Enter, and let's say now that I need to see one part of that layer as opposed to seeing the whole layer altogether. One thing I can do, which is not recommended, is select the part that I want to keep, let's say this one, and choose Select Inverse and then delete the rest. It works, but that's not really a good solution because I destroyed the other pixels, so I cannot really retrieve them back unless I go backwards. A much better solution would be to actually create something that we call a layer mask. So now that we have a selection, we go and add a layer mask, and now we have this in a non-destructive manner, which means that I can edit. So if I click back on my mask here, so I have the layer, content, and the mask. If I go to my mask and I go, for example, to my brush tool, select a brush and increase the size. If I paint with black, I'm actually removing from the visible area. If I switch to white and I paint with white, I'm actually adding to my visible area. So the shortcut to switch between black and white is X. So when you press X, you are actually either adding or removing from your mask. Another thing you can do is press Alt and click to go to the actual mask, and here you can also work with that. And to go back to the result, you press Alt and click again on the mask. Now if I wanted to make my mask feathery, which is not actually blurring the image but blurring the mask so that the borders are feathered, you would select the mask and not the pixels, and you'd go to Filter, Blur, and say Gaussian Blur, and by increasing the radius you are blurring out the edges of the mask, if you look here, and not the actual pixels. Right, so if I press Alt and click, I see that it's just a mask that's been blurred. Alright, another thing you can do also is uncheck the lock between the two. So now if you click on the image, you can move the image underneath the mask. If you actually click on the mask, you would move the mask above the image. So this is how layer masks work in Photoshop. We're gonna see now how we can use them in After Effects. So let's go to After Effects and create a new composition and add an image. Actually what I'm gonna do is use video. So I'm gonna use the videos that are available with Vista. Let's say the bear video, and I'll create a new composition and drag the bear inside. Alright, so now what I need to do first of all is scale this up so that it fits the composition. This happens to be 120% of its original size. Alright, so how do I create a mask in After Effects? This applies to still images and to animated footage like we have right now. The same workflow. So the first requirement is that you need to select your layer, which it is selected. If I look down here, I just have transform and audio because the layer has audio. If I press play, I can hear that. Alright, but it doesn't have a mask yet. It doesn't have a mask yet. So to add a mask, you would select the layer and you would use the pen tool. One of the ways to add a mask is to select the layer and to use the pen tool. So let's say that I want to select an area around the bear so that I just see the bear from this footage. That's my purpose, to isolate the bear from its environment and put it somewhere else. So I'm gonna hit Control plus to zoom over, and if I click with my pen tool, I would create corner points. If I click and drag, I would create curvy points, and the more points I add, the better definition I will have, and therefore the better my selection. Alright, it's gonna take me some time to finish that, so I'm gonna undo, and myself I'm gonna do it a bit roughly, and you will do it a bit more precisely yourself. So I will actually do it on the outside, click and drag for curvy points. So before you actually finish the mask, you'll not see any concrete result. That's the first point here, not that one. That's the handle of the first point, but that's the first point. And I need to finish here to actually create my mask. So now that I have finished my mask, I see that I only see that part of that layer. Now to edit, all I have to do is select these points and move them around. And as I told you, the more points you have, the better, because you're gonna be closer to the original silhouette. This technique is used a lot in the movies to take an actor out of its environment, his environment, and place them somewhere else. But of course, you have to spend much more time than what I'm doing right now. So this is how I create a mask. And if I had another layer down below, I would have a combination of both. Alright, so if I hit RAM preview, I'm gonna see that through this bare layer I can only see through that shape so far, but for the other one I can see the whole thing because it doesn't have a mask. So if I open now my bare layer, I see that I have a new entry for masks. I just have one mask, which is mask number 1. Now what can we do with this mask? The first thing I can do, like you would in Photoshop, if I select the mask here and press Ctrl I would invert the colors of the mask, and therefore the result will be inverted. So I would get the rest of the image instead of getting the actual white color, because I inverted these colors. So Ctrl I again, clicking on the mask, will revert back to the original. In After Effects, you have to click here, inverted, and you would get the opposite of what you had before. So instead of leaving the bare and taking everything out, you are taking out the bare and leaving the rest. So when you play, you're gonna get this. So that's the first thing. Let's uncheck inverted and go back here. That's a color here that I can change. It doesn't affect anything except for the color of the line. So if you leave it like this, this line, once selected, will be pinkish. Alright, so let's select it from here and go back to yellow. It's a bit easier to see. Now I have to expand the mask to see the mask properties. Mask feather is like I did in Photoshop when I blurred out this mask, but here you do it numerically, which is better. So you go and drag these numbers. I'm gonna solo this layer so that it's the only one that I see. So whenever I do that, the mask is no longer sharp, it's blurry depending on this value, right? So you can increase it or decrease it. The opacity of the mask, if you decrease it, it will go down. The mask expansion is to increase the mask depending on its shape, either outwards or inwards, which is very useful. Alright, so this is how I create a mask in Photoshop. Next we're gonna see how to animate a mask.